Please give me a second. I just need to try and locate my document so that I can be able to share it. While I'm doing that, does someone want to give us a summary of what we covered last week? Anyone? Anyone remember what we covered last week? Nobody remembers anything we covered last week. Or am I not audible? Hello?
Yeah,
Milton, am
audible.
I audible? Okay.
Yes, we are just trying to remind ourselves here when you were speaking about. But I know that you were speaking about Daniel chapter 1, 2, and 3, and then you went into 4. There was comparison that was made by Milton about Daniel 4 and between Daniel 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So we are just trying to remind ourselves now what were the points that were brought forth.
Okay.
Now there was 3 steps of salvation as well that was involved. Ulindelo, that's what she said. Still, no, but then we are still trying to think.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Last weekend we were doing Daniel chapter 4, and we're doing the Daniel chapter 4, 5, and 6. We were how you say, we were interpreting these 3 chapters and what they mean for us in our time, trying to find the prophetic meaning, I think. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. We are looking at the book of Daniel, and obviously we'll end up in the book of Revelation. We are in the history of the Sunday law, and much about these chapters is being touched on. But there are many people that do not have a foundational understanding of Daniel and Revelation, and that's why we're having these lessons. So thank you so much for that summary. We have so far covered the first 6 chapters, which are the history part of the book of Daniel. And we saw that it's divided into 2 parts. The first chapters are divided into 2 parts, chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. Chapter 1, first angel's message. Chapter 2, second angel's message. Chapter 3, third angel's message. Because in chapter 1, you have a message of fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. The experience of Daniel and his friends being in captivity and having to choose whether they're going to fear God or fear Nebuchadnezzar because of the diet test. And we see that in chapter 2, Babylon falls because of the statue that is struck by the stone. and it crashes into pieces. And we get to chapter 3, where there is a test. Now Nebuchadnezzar has constructed his image of the beast, and people are being forced to worship it on the fear of death. That being the third angel's message. And then we saw that that history is repeated in chapter 4, 5, 6, 4 first angel's message, 5 second angel's message, 6 third angel's message. 4 is the first angel's message because it's now Nebuchadnezzar that is being called to fear God because he has built this mighty empire and he's so proud of himself. He has forgotten God is the one that gives kingdoms to people. Second angel's message, because that's the chapter that talks about the literal fall of Babylon. That's when Babylon is conquered by Medo-Persia. When Nebuchadnezzar gets drunk, the whole city of Babylon gets drunk, and Cyrus and his army are able to gain access. And on that note, I wanted to refer us to Isaiah chapter 45, I think. Let me just quickly go there because that's a passage in scripture that I forgot to touch on. The verse that because we had a question, how does Cyrus represent Christ and all of that? And so in the book of Isaiah, is it? Isaiah 45 verse 1, it says, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. So Cyrus is the anointed. That is how Cyrus represents Christ. Whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. So that is in reference to the Babylonian gates that were forgotten that day and left open, so that Cyrus and his army were able to gain access without shooting a single person dead. Obviously, Belshazzar was killed that night when Babylon fell. So that is the fall of Babylon, chapter 2. And then chapter 3 is the test that when Daniel now is thrown into a lion's den because he chooses to worship God rather than to worship Darius. So those 3 chapters are a repeat of the first, second, and third angels' messages. So we are done with the historical part of the book of Daniel. Today we are going to begin with the book of with the prophetic part of the book of Daniel. This is now talking about the visions, the actual visions that Daniel was shown. Yes, there is prophecy in the first part, 6 chapters, for sure. But the vision that was seen in the first chapters was visions given to Nebuchadnezzar. Now we're going to look at Daniel's own visions. We're going to look at chapter 7. So chapter 7 really looks at the history that was given to Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. But in this instance, God is going to use these beasts to represent the very same kingdoms that are presented in chapter 2. This is Daniel's first dream. Obviously, besides the communication that God gave him about the statue. This is Daniel's first dream. He received it in the first year of Belshazzar, so it was still in the time of the kingdom of Babylon. And he's presented with 4 wild beasts. And what the beasts emphasize by just looking at the characteristics of the beasts they emphasize on the politics of these kingdoms. And they come up from the seas. How we know that the beast represents the kingdom, it's within the chapter itself. If you remember the William Miller's rules, one of those rules says that when you're trying to understand the symbol, you don't have to go very far away. You can be able to work it out from the verse itself. So God gives his vision, and God also gives understanding to Daniel that the fourth beast is the fourth kingdom. So that's how we know a beast is a kingdom. Everyone, you're free to interrupt at any point. Ne? Yeah. So what is the purpose for which these kingdoms exist? The reason why these kingdoms exist is to war against God, to war against God's people. That's the ultimate purpose of these kingdoms. So I want us to go back into a bit of history. And we've done these studies before, but we're going to go back there. To the history prior to the flood, we all know there was no kingdoms. There's nothing we find in that history that suggests that there was powerful kingdoms in existence. You know, after sin, when Adam and Eve were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, it seemed like people just were free to go wherever they wanted, do whatever they wanted. You know, you find a testimony to the fact that some guy decides that he and I is going to start the whole practice of polygamy all by himself, you know, never been done before. And he decides he's going to try this new thing. You find the testimony of Cain going off to some land and trying to prosper there. We find people, some are into music, others into architecture, and people are just developing their skills and perfecting them. There was not much about organized society in the history before the flood. But after the flood is when we begin to see the whole development concerning nations and, you know, societies now coming together. Why can somebody suggest a reason why after the flood there was this idea of let's get together and try to do things together? Build nations, build, you know.
Elder D,
Yes, please.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
I was kicked out of internet. Okay. Could it be that maybe after the flood, people wanted to do things mainly because they disobeyed God's command to spread out and fill the earth. Instead of dispersing, they chose unity for their own purposes, maybe to build a city and a tower reaching the heavens, aiming to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered. That's how I see it.
Very
Elder
good
TK,
suggestion. Yes. Yes. Somebody was talking. Go ahead.
I was asking, can you please repeat your question?
My question is, before the flood, there were no kingdoms, no nations, no kingdoms. But after the flood is when we begin to see the evolution of this idea of societies coming together and forming nations. So the question is why? Why do we think that's the case? So I like the answer that Temba has suggested, that as soon as God says disperse, they decide, no, we are not going to disperse. Owen?
Yes, I think they were still in fear on the destruction that just happened, and they were just thought to themselves, let's come up with plan B, least we experience what had just experienced before us.
Okay, but how does that connect to kingdom? The idea of kingdom? Couldn't they have, or are you suggesting it's because if they were going to, if they want, they had no trust in what God had said, because God said, I will not destroy the world with a flood again. If they didn't trust God, then they needed to come together, to work together, to protect themselves against this God that nearly destroyed them?
Yes, because I think they were not trusting that God will keep his word to say he will not destroy them. So they had to like put themselves together and also put some kind of like a kinglyship to say that that particular person will protect them against God, something like that.
A strong man, a strong apiscal man to protect them against this irrational God who's so aggressive and, can't be
Yeah.
trusted with our lives. Okay.
Yes,
Any other
yes.
suggestions?
Hello.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is my thinking. I think that maybe also the idea of this person, there was one person who wanted to be the one to save the society. So you had one person who was very influential, who was thinking, let's say, out of the box because of they had known the society in this manner. So now there was this one individual who wanted to explore outside the box. Let's be let's create our own kingdom. Let's not be dependent on this God who did one, two, three. So that person needed to convince them and needed to show them that it can work, and the individual needed to act the part. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but the person needed to act the part to see to for people to be able to really buy into the story that there might be a possibility of them being this kingdom that cannot fall or that cannot be destroyed by this God who hates people so much to destroy the antediluvians.
Any other thoughts?
For example, like a populist, you know how George, yeah, you know the likes of Donald Trump, you know, the likes of all the dictators, they sought out something to create so much instability in the minds of the people to be able to get the upper hand or to be the people who are always having the solution. Like if you look at Donald Trump being the solution person, you look at your Putin the solution person, all these other Maduros being the solution people. I think that was the kind of maybe the mindset, but maybe at a higher level than that which we think of today, because of I think the people by that time, they might have been also well balanced in their minds, not like your yeah.
I think all these answers are correct. They are all adding a dimension to the complete picture. But overall, the idea is that the flood has just literally almost destroyed everything. People are looking back at that and thinking to themselves, you know, we need to take care of ourselves. And they don't trust God, because God said, I will not do this thing again. But then they build a Tower of Babel because they're thinking, we don't trust you. In case you do it again, we have a plan B. And this is when you begin to see the societies, like individuals collaborating with others, forming families, family tribes, forming nations, nations forming empires, coming together, you know, to cooperate together to do one thing, okay? Because they don't trust God. And this rebellion, 1 Samuel 15 verse 23 calls it witchcraft. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. So rebellion equals witchcraft. Witchcraft equals stubbornness. Stubbornness equals iniquity equals idolatry. Idolatry, we know, is to worship anything other than God, the creator, whether that thing is called something or is called nothing. Because thou hast rejected the word of God, of the Lord hath also rejected thee from being king. Okay, so this is another story, but I wanted us to pull out the idea of when people rebel against, when the people reject the word of God, they have to act on that rejection. And that what that rejection begins to look like is rebellion, which is really witchcraft. Stubbornness is witchcraft. Anyway, so there was a time when there was society but no state. The idea of state did not come out of the blue. It developed over a period of time. Because, you know, after the flood, there was only 8 people, and it took time for those 8 people to start reproducing and recreating until we get to the time of Nimrod. The earth was free. Anyone could go anywhere and do anything. And I know today, with, you know, we are born into an age in which there's boundaries, there's borders, you know, there's the idea of this is Africa, and then this is South Africa, and then this is Pretoria, and then this is, you know, this complex complex in Pretoria, this estate in Pretoria that's closed off by a wall, and then within the estate you've got the house, the individual houses with the individual families inside there with the individual people. So we are born in an age where everything is closed off, and the idea is so within our genes that you can't just go anywhere you want. You can't just get out of your house and walk into your neighbor's house and open the fridge and eat whatever you want to eat. You can't just enter into a complex. You've got to be let in by somebody. The complexes today that use biometrics, and if you have to get in, you have to have an access code given to you by somebody that lives in there. And if you are to come to South Africa, you got to cross the border. You've got to have the right documents that allow you to enter. You can't just go into any country and identify an empty piece of land and build your house there. Not even within South Africa. Like, there's lots of free land along the freeways that doesn't seem to be occupied. But you can't just go and build your house there. But so it's very difficult for us to conceptualize a period in time when anyone could go anywhere. The earth was free. There was no borders. You could go anywhere and do anything. There was no territorial lines. But now the problem of apostasy, as it began to increase, then you find that there are people that began to have this idea of dominion, the idea of, I'm going to take over this territory and it's going to become mine. And I'm going to protect it. And to protect it, I need to use force. The reason why they needed to use force is because, in fact, it was inherently not right. You couldn't just take territory and say, this is mine, because the earth was free to everyone. But now when you begin to have ideas of dominion, then it is imperative that if I took over, if I decided to demarcate a territory, and if I decided to go against the norm and claim it as my own territory, I was going to have to use force to protect it. So this is where the origin of kingdoms comes in. And I suggest, for those who are interested, you can read all of this from A.T. Jones. So we've already looked at the history of how God was replaced by idols. When God was removed from God's place, something had to take the place of God. And that thing became the idol. But that idol, A.T. Jones says, the idol is nothing, because the idol is made by a person. So it's nothing without the person. So whoever worships the idol is actually not worshiping the idol. They are worshiping the idol maker, the person that comes up with the idol, the idea of the idol. And the idol has to have two things. What are those two things we've learned since 2018? What are the two characteristics that make up an idol?
Character and image.
Sorry? Sorry?
And image.
I can't quite hear. Does anyone hear who's talking and what they're saying? Is it
The
my network?
image and character.
Yes, the character and the form. So you've got a form, you must have a form, and you have to have a character. So the person will come up with an idol and say, okay, this is the god of rain, or let's say Apis bull. This is the one that we are most familiar with. This is the Apis bull. The Apis bull is strong and powerful, and mighty, and all of those. And it's in the form of a calf. So it has a form and it has the characteristics. And people that are impressed by the form and the characteristic will begin to worship that idol. But they are not really worshiping the idol itself. They are worshiping the person that has created that idol. So the worship of idols is nothing more than the worship of man. Why? Because God has been removed from God's place and replaced by this idol, which is really the worship of the man. And it takes us, so that's why we saw that the title king was for God, but then it becomes the title of the idol, and it becomes the title of the most powerful, peaceful kind of man that is in existence at that time. And the first man to have the audacity to take the place of God was Nimrod. As apostasy increased, Nimrod was the first man, because let's not forget progression. Everything happened progressively over a period of time. So there was a time when a man could not call himself king, and then there was a time when Nimrod stands up and says, "Me, I'm king, as apostasy increased. So the very essence of a kingdom is that to be a kingdom is synonymous with being God. So those who are worshiping that idol are worshiping the man behind the idol. That man stands in the place of God. So to be king was as good as being a god. To be a king of a kingdom was to be a god of a specified territory. So that king had to have territory, had to have subjects who would be willing to give allegiance to this person. And so you can't have a king without a kingdom, a king without a territory. They had to have territory. And in order to have that territory, because it's really something new and out of this world, it's not traditional, they had to protect that territory using force. So the king had to have an army, and the army's job was to protect the territory of that king, protect the citizens of that king, yes, and maintain the integrity of that kingdom, so to speak. So the synonyms for king are the following: emperor, ruler, monarch, potentate. We know this: chief, overlord, prince, leader, ruler, lord. We know how in the past, outside of equality circles, outside of this movement, how men like to call each other chief. But on the other side, there are these interesting words like star, celebrity, superstar, master, kingpin, megastar. All these are titles. They are exactly the same as the word king. And that is why society likes to idolize. The word comes from the word idol. Idolize people that have great achievements in music, in sports, in academics. Whoever we find, has achieved much, we idolize them, we put them on a pedestal, we call them a star, we call them a celebrity, top dog. These are kings, they are idols. They are worshipped because of their great achievements. So there really is no difference between Nebuchadnezzar and I don't know what their names are. Powerful soccer players. Yeah,
Cristiano
more people. Sorry, Ronaldo, whatever.
Cristiano.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, so it's the same category, it's the same mindset. It's the same. And what we are really describing here when we are looking at the origin of kingdoms, idols, Nimrod, king, to be king, to have a kingdom, to be a chief, to be a prince, to be a lord, to be a star. All of this is on the bedrock of patriarchy, because you must be, if you're a star, you must be better than everyone else. You must be greater than everyone else. There must be that hierarchy of power, hierarchy of abilities, hierarchies, yes, where if I don't have a specialized skill or special, ability, I cannot be anybody. I'm just a nobody. So all of that is based on that founded on the bedrock of patriarchy and hierarchy and inequality. Inequality. That is why we touched on inequality when Nebuchadnezzar was suffering his judgment in chapter 4. It becomes a factor. It becomes a huge factor in how going forward from the time of Nimrod, kingdoms are going to maintain themselves. They maintain themselves by force. And then once a person has their territory, they are not content to just keep their territory. They must now go and attack the next territory and make their kingdom bigger and bigger and have imperialistic aspirations. So this dominionism, where I now want to dominate and be better than the next person, leads to territorialism, where I grab a piece of territory and claim it as my own, and not content to remain there, I will aspire to come and take your territory, which you have also claimed as your own. And if I am more powerful than you, I will be able to take over your territory and build my empire. That's why we're now looking at these four great kingdoms in Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 4, you will just see this theme running all through that history, where Babylon overpowers Assyria, and it goes and grabs Jerusalem, and it goes and overpowers Egypt and Lydia and becomes a superpower. Babylon becomes a superpower for 70 years. That is until the Middle Persians come along and are able to access the gates, because Babylon has become so confident, so overconfident in its security, that they feel they are invincible. At that point, when they are feeling absolutely invincible, they do something stupid and get drunk. And on that night, the Middle Persians ram them over. Because now the Middle Persians are also having this dominionistic, territorialistic, imperialistic mindset. They also want to become the greatest, and show their power and have the whole world worship them. They have the same mindset as Babylon. And when Alexander comes along to do his thing, it's the same mindset. When the Romans do likewise, it's that same mindset. So the conquest, oppression, dominion, monarchy, imperialism, all of this came about to oppose God-given freedom. What God had planned was for human beings to live free on this planet, even after sin, to live on this free on this planet we have identified the aspect of freedom as being a fundamental human right. And that is what God has desired for humanity. But when God is removed from God's place, and Nimrod presumes to take the place of God, to do the unthinkable, he brings the idea versus freedom, in opposition to freedom, dominionism. And dominionism is going to be unleashed upon the peoples of the earth, on the bedrock of patriarchy and inequality and hierarchy. So that's why we are saying the kingdoms of this earth, their purpose of existence is to oppose God and God's people. Are we still together? Is making sense? Yeah, so Nimrod, as we've identified, was the first man to come up with this idea of building a monarchy, an empire, a one-man power. And the Bible identifies Nimrod as a mighty hunter. What was he hunting? Can somebody educate us on what Nimrod was hunting?
Elder T,
Yes.
probably he was a mighty hunter of. I'm just guessing. Probably was a mighty hunter of animals. He was He was not fearing anything, and I think he demanded the respect of people. So if you go to the literal way, you can say that. But when you look at it in another way, I think he was a very charming individual with a very nice way to persuade people. And if you don't want to listen, maybe fist or sword will work in his favor. Force will work in his favor.
Okay. So he was hunting animals, right? The Genesis 10 verse 9 says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Okay, so Tuttle suggests he was hunting animals. Any other thoughts?
He was a mighty hunter in defiance or opposition to God, and also a tyrant who used force and violence to dominate people and establish his kingdom.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Elder T?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be correct, but there's somewhere some time ago where I learned that some biblical scholars interpret hunting as conquering people or kingdoms. So I believe that him being powerful, he went conquering kingdoms and people, and then I believe that would be another sense of making him a mighty hunter. I stand to be corrected, though.
You're absolutely right. When it says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter, it's not referring to him hunting lions and gazelles and all that. It's actually a reference to how he brutalized people. He pursued and crushed people. That was in his nature. That is how he could rise up above everyone else, dominating them, bringing them under his dominion, and he becomes the one man who controlled everything. And that's how monarchies began. So he is presented as a powerful figure. He's the one who began the kingdom in China, Babel, Erech, and Akkad. And when it says he's a mighty hunter before the Lord, it is making reference to the fact that he's challenging God and he's brutalizing people who are God's creation as if to challenge God. He not only challenged God in terms of calling himself king, but he challenges God in terms of oppressing and bringing under his dominion, the people that were created by God. So he was a pursuer and a crusher of people. He was overbearing. He was a tyrant. He had this whole alpha masculinity idea around him. Very highly ambitious and dominating. And if you take Nimrod, he becomes the very philosophy of this world's history. If you're looking at the history of the world, the people that are written down in the history books as being great people. That is until the 20th, 21st century. All these other thousands of years, when you're talking about history and the great people that are found in history, it is the history of the world. This toxic masculinity, the mindset of Nimrod to dominate everybody else. So that's how kingdoms have come and gone. That's why we don't have kingdoms that have lasted forever and ever. Because you have one Nimrod saying, I'm the greatest. He proves himself. He fights in the wars. He becomes a mighty general or a mighty king. And he rules the world with an iron fist or whatever, but that's until the next one that's greater than him comes and overpowers him. And then you have the same mindset repeating itself in a vicious cycle over and over again. That's the history of the world. It's a man's world driven by toxic masculinity that's represented in this one person called Nimrod. This is the philosophy that he taught the world. This was his idea of perpetuating the human race besides the plan of redemption that God came up with after man sinned. The idea is that, instead of worrying about lambs dying and a savior coming, we need to secure our own perpetuity, so we're going to use dominance, force, oppression, and history says that, if you were a human being on the planet, you would just pray that you have a good king, a merciful king, a thoughtful king. Because if you didn't, you are just going to be subject to all the drama of oppression and just being unable to do your thing. But, now and then people would be fortunate to have a kind king, one that was thoughtful for the people and would try to make life easy for their citizens. But was that good enough? Is that good enough for a person that's created by God and given the freedom to pursue their dreams without restriction? Was that good enough? Because at the end of the day, people remained under the mercy of one person. If the person was good, they could make some progress. If the person was not good, well, no progress could be made. And that's the history of the world. Whether you're looking at the kingdom of Babylon or Medo-Persia, the big biblical kingdoms, or you're looking at other kingdoms not found in the Bible, like the Zulu kingdom, and the Aztecs, South America, China, all those other kingdoms not mentioned in scripture, it doesn't matter. The methodology was the same. You dominate, and you bring under subjugation within your territory, and then you must now try and protect it from other wolves, other vicious animals. That is why in Daniel chapter 7, God uses the imagery of wild beasts to represent these kingdoms. It is to demonstrate that the philosophy that runs through these kingdoms, that dictated the type of politics that is played out, was that of alpha masculinity, overbearing tyranny, ambition, and dominance. This is the very ideology that is driving Donald Trump. Donald Trump personifies Nimrod, has exactly the same mindset. So Nimrod started it, and then others followed, all the way from the plains of China down to the kingdoms of Rome and Babylon and all that, and then coming down to our history today. Exercise all power, perpetually hammer the weaker nations or the weaker people, conquer and reconquer repeatedly. And all of that was to crush freedom and the love of freedom. I think the last part is very important, the love of freedom, because this idea, that's why I said earlier that the idea that land used to be free and there never used to be boundaries, there never used to be borders. It is so foreign to us, like we can't even imagine that it's possible to live in a society where there are no borders. And that is why many of us struggle with freedom. We're kind of so used to being under oppression and under control, under domination, that the idea of freedom becomes very, very foreign, and we don't even know how to exercise it. And this is the reason why worldly kingdoms exist. So in the book of Daniel chapter 7, it will talk about how these kingdoms come. Okay, let's go there and read. Any comments so far? We're going to Daniel chapter 7. So in the first verse is talking about the time when Daniel gets this vision. But in verse 2, it says, Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. So these winds, what the winds mean, you find that in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 31. A noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord hath a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. He will give them that are wicked to the sword, saith the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. So whirlwind is connected to this evil thing that is taking place from nation to nation. So winds are a symbolic language which denotes strife, political commotion, and war. But what this strife, political commotion, war is all about, it's this overbearing tyranny, toxic masculinity, alpha masculinity, ambition, and dominating. That's what this strife, political commotion, and war is all about. So the definition of seas or waters, because when Daniel sees these beasts, they are coming up out of the sea. It's a symbol of people, nations, and tongues. And you find that in Revelation 17, verse 15. The first kingdom that we speak about here, and of course, it's not the first kingdom to ever exist because we already had China, Chaldea, Elam, Karak, Akkad, Babel. Then you come to Assyria, Egypt, and later Assyria, early Assyria and late Assyria, and then Babylon. But we are starting out this prophecy at this point in time because this is when God is opening up the future to Daniel when they are in captivity. It is during the time of Babylon. So God doesn't have to go back and give the history of Egypt and Assyria and all of those kingdoms prior, because the intention is to get the people ready in the future. So the first kingdom is the Lion Kingdom, and lion represented the strength because it had two wings that represented the swiftness with which Babylon came into world domination. But it rises, it came to power very fast. And then it, remained a superpower for those plus minus 70 years. But the Bible says that at the end, it became effeminate. Can somebody, because I don't know if I'm still, we are still together. Can somebody read Daniel chapter 7, verse 4, which describes the Lion Kingdom?
Hello.
Yes.
Daniel chapter 7.
7, verse 4.
Verse 4. It reads
Mm.
as follows. The first was like a lion and had eagle wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand on the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. That's verse 4.
Thank you so much. So you do have all your symbols there. The eagle's wings. We know that an eagle is one of the fastest, most powerful birds in the sky. So if you have this lion which has wings, it means it's flying very fast. It's a lion. A lion is a symbol of strength. So it's a powerful kingdom, and it comes to rise very swiftly, right? But when you get to the end of the verse, it says that when this lion is standing on its feet, a man's heart is given to it. So it's a lion with a man's heart. This is suggesting some form of depreciation in terms of the glory and the power. And then, in other words, it becomes, the lion became effeminate. And we know the history, how Nebuchadnezzar became so proud because of the wealth that was within Babylon. But while he's piling up all this wealth, already there's a power that is coveting all that wealth and wants to take it over. He doesn't know all of that. He's just standing on the top of his palace, on the wall of his palace, and thinking, am I not the one that has built this great kingdom? And while he's proudly saying all those things, the judgment, of course, came upon him, and shortly after that, Babylon is going to fall. Have we left out anything as far as the Lion Kingdom is concerned? Okay, let's move on to verse 5. If somebody can read the next kingdom.
All right. Verse 5. And then it says, and behold, another beast, the second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself one on one side, and it had 3 ribs, and the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Polani. Anything stand out to you? The symbols we have there are that of a bear, and this bear is not symmetrical. One side is higher than the other, and it has 3 ribs in the mouth. What do we know about this kingdom? Anyone want to suggest anything?
Yes, already.
Mm.
Yeah, so when we see it raised up itself on one side, I think I remember that the Medes and the Persians were not equal when it comes to power. One were greater than the other.
Yes. Right. Thank you so much. What about the bear itself? What can we draw out of the symbol of the bear?
Hello.
Yes.
I think. Oh, sorry. I think one another thing is that what is interesting is to see that all these animals are male figures, like they are male animals,
Mm,
and to the bear, I think the bear is very strong, and
mm,
it's not that vicious like a lion. I'm not sure if it's not like vicious as like a lion, but it's a very very dangerous animal. And
mm,
another, it's I think the 3 ribs on its mouth. I know that we say that there are 3 geographical areas it plugs out before it comes to power. Um, yeah,
mm. Yes, that's right. But just to correct the idea of a bear, actually bears are absolutely vicious. In fact, some people think you would rather meet a lion than a bear. Um, but the bear has superior size and strength, and it has the ability to withstand attacks. While lions are known for their speed, agility, and powerful bite. But the bear's sheer bulk, just because it's a huge animal, it has powerful claws. It has the ability to grapple. And that can make it really a very, very highly dangerous creature. Yeah, so yeah, they are both of them, you know, they have their different characteristics. Lion is swift, it has a powerful bite, but the bear is significantly larger and heavier, and because of that weight, it can have a powerful impact. Yeah, so anyway, the bear kingdom represents the Medo-Persians. They were not equal in strength, as Lani said. It's inferior to the lion raised on one side, and the three ribs in the mouth represent that it had to conquer Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt to become the superpower. But the Bible tells us that it arose and devoured much flesh. So between the two kingdoms, Medo-Persia and Babylon, which of those kingdoms oppressed people more? What are your thoughts? Is it Babylon or Medo-Persia?
I think in terms of oppression, it's going to escalate as the resistance of oppression is going to also like grow, because after Babylon, or when Babylon secures its territory, usually this security was kind of a false sense of security which kings would have put upon themselves, but usually resistance mounts over time. And throughout this whole generation, we are going to see that as humanity expand, it's inherently human nature to resist oppression, and the tactics of the repeat of this story shows that the oppression escalates, it doesn't go down.
So yeah, you know, using that formula, it means that Medo-Persia was more vicious. But even without that formula, you can just see the history of the Israelites in Babylon, how Nebuchadnezzar favored these young men, made sure they got the best education. They were even, you know, put into big political positions within the government. And Nebuchadnezzar is represented as this tree, and you know, all the birds and animals are harboring safely under this tree. So the idea is there that Babylon didn't really do grievous oppressions to its own people. And it's represented as a lion. A lion is an animal compared to a bear. You know, ask anyone. We glorify lions. You know, lions have this sense of elegance as opposed to a bear. And this bear is represented as already having three ribs in its mouth. You know, to get three ribs in your mouth, it means you know you need to have, you know, to have killed something. So Medo-Persia is represented as a vicious power that arose and devoured much flesh. It was cruel, rapacious, and robbers or spoilers of the people. So when they would conquer a nation, they would leave it devastated. So let's go to Kingdom, because I want us to finish chapter 7. I don't want us to go into too much detail, but this is just lays a foundation for further study, private study. Who's going to read verse 6? The next kingdom.
Verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
Thank you so much for that reading. So obviously now you're going to have an even more powerful kingdom coming up to overpower the bear. I mean, can you imagine the bear as big as it is? But the next kingdom that actually overpowers it is a leopard, and a leopard is smaller even than a lion. But this leopard has 4 wings of a bird. So we've already seen what wings represent on the lion. And it had 4 heads. Anyone remember the meaning behind all this?
Hello?
Yes?
So in terms of territorial conquering, very quickly the Leopard Kingdom spread its territory to almost covering the whole or entire human population at that time. And it also has, you can see the idea of speed and the ambition which we see in Babylon. It's repeated with even greater efficiency.
Yes.
And it doesn't show signs of division like Medo-Persia, which had like 2 tribes coming together. The kingdom is unified again under one power quickly.
Yes, so the wings represented the speed. We know the speed of how Alexander took over, Alexander the Great took over the world. That goes without saying. So this animal didn't just have 2 wings, it had 4 wings. So it did its job the fastest. And we know that in the history, Alexander and his army were able to subdue the world in a very limited period of time. It had 4 heads. Those 4 heads represent the generals, because we know that that Alexander did not live long, and after his death, 4 generals came up. And yeah, so that's the history of Greece. The history of Greece, we're going to look at it a bit more in chapter 8. So for now, we'll leave it at this. Let's look at the last beast, who's going to read chapter verse 7.
Seven.
Yes, go ahead.
After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong, exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
May you please go ahead and try to just identify some of the symbology there?
Okay, so the premise of, I think, Daniel chapter 7 is a repeat, I think, of some of the symbols in chapter 2. So we see a combination of an animal with a teeth of iron. And these symbols, I think they are more of not, in terms of William Miller's rules, you can see these symbols are not representing natural animals in their natural form. In reality, there's no animal with teeth of steel. So we know the meaning of these symbols. According to Miller's rules, you are required to see a symbolic representation, and the unusual I would say behavior which in the symbolic form shows exceedingly power that does things that are unthinkable. And when we follow the structure of these kingdoms, this is the Roman kingdom, pagan Rome, and the nature in which it rises, it's shown to be a bit different from the other ones. I think the whole premise of the operations of how Rome comes to power, it starts with making alliances and then conquer subjects when they're not expecting, when they think they're friends. That pattern we see, it's not what we see before. The kingdoms which come before, they just fight direct wars and conquer. Rome make alliances first and then take their so-called friends unexpectedly, and then they rule supremely.
Okay, thank you for that. That's an important point. We are looking at the terrible beast, the terrible beast, and you're making reference to chapter 2 because it has iron teeth, and chapter 2 represented this kingdom as the legs of iron. So we have a justification there to link those two and see that they're parallel. It had exceeding strong iron teeth and 10 horns. So then it ground the nations into the very dust beneath its brazen feet. This is the kingdom of pagan Rome, and how pagan Rome came to rise to power through the history that we will see in chapter 8. And it ruled the world until it began to manifest the 10 kingdoms. Those 10 kingdoms were the Huns, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, the Franks, Vandals, Suevi, Burgundians, Heruli, Anglo-Saxons, and Lombards. And out of these 10 horns, so maybe somebody should read verse 8, sorry. Let's read the verse that follows.
Verse 8.
I considered the horn, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things.
Thank you, Temba. So we've got this creature, this terrible creature with the 10 horns, and then out of these 10 horns came one little horn when it did what? When it uprooted 3. So there were first 10, then when this rude horn, it's actually described as a rude horn because it just came up and it didn't even like politely ask for space. It just literally pushed 3 out of the way. Those were the Ostrogoths, Vandals, and the Heruli. And then this little horn rises up above all the other horns and it started to speak things. Hold on. So it says that it had the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. And then from verse 9 onwards, I beheld till the thrones were cast down. Now you see the Ancient of Days and the judgment being set and all of that. But up to this point, we have these 4 kingdoms and this little horn coming up, which is the aspect of this bear, of this beast that really shocked Daniel. It is this little horn that caused Daniel to be stunned, that an angel had to be sent to explain to him the aspects of this kingdom. That is why now an angel came and began to explain to Daniel what the beast meant. So does anyone remember what things this little horn was saying?
Because this horn has eyes like eyes of man. It symbolizes intelligence, insight, and cunning.
Mm-hmm.
So when it uproots the three kingdoms, it persecutes God's people with arrogant and boastful speech.
Mm. It claimed to be God, didn't it? Or at least the vicar of God, the very representative of God in terms of if the horn says something, it is as good as God speaking. When you jump down to verse 20, it says, and out of the 10 horns that were in his head, because this is now the angel explaining, and the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than its fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints and the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break in pieces. But I want to get to verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand unto a time and times and the dividing of times. So this time and times and half a time, we saw in chapter 4 that a time equals to 1 year, and 1 year equals 360 days. Therefore, 360 is a time plus another time, which is 360, plus half a time, which is 180, adds up to 1260. So for 1260 days, or let me say years, this little horn was going to wear out the saints. And that's the period from when to when. I think that's the easy part.
1798.
538 to 1798, when the saints were worn out by this little horn that was so arrogant and boastful. But then God showed the angel tells Daniel that don't worry, even though this little horn is going to do amazing things in treading down God's people, God is still going to respond. So that's an aspect that Elder Terry does highlight, that in every chapter of prophecy, whenever you see these worldly kingdoms imposing themselves, God will always respond. So in chapter 2, the kingdoms of the earth are presented, and then you see God responding with the stone that strikes the image. Likewise, in chapter 7, the kingdoms are presented. These kingdoms that are built on the ideology of dominionism, oppression, toxic masculinity, oppressing and crushing people. The mindset of Nimrod, who was a hunter, a mighty hunter, who was a pursuer and oppressor of people, which is what these kingdoms are doing, pursuing and oppressing people. And for Daniel, it looks like this is endless, like what's going to happen? Then God has to now show Daniel, don't worry. God always responds whenever these worldly kingdoms are trying to annihilate humanity. And in this chapter, God responds by showing Daniel the judgment and the assurance that, yeah, you can see this little horn doing its thing, but the kingdom is going to be taken away from these worldly kingdoms, and the saints are going to take over the kingdom. In verse 27, it says, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. And then it talks about how Daniel was troubled. But nonetheless, we have established that the reason why these kingdoms exist is to oppose freedom through conquest, oppression, dominion, monarchy, imperialism, using toxic masculinity methodologies, ambitious, dominating, toxic, overbearing tyranny. And that this is the history of the world. When you look at the past 6,000 years, that's all you're going to find. You're just going to find one kingdom overpowering another and another. That is why when God's people came out of Egypt and now they wanted to have a king over them, God had to tell them, this is not my idea, it's not my plan, but I'm not going to force you. And as soon as they did what the world was doing, that is what brought Israel down, ancient Israel down. Because now they had these kings that were overbearing. They were warned that if you have a king, this is what the king's going to do. He's going to take away your children. He's going to take away your daughters. Your sons are going to have to fight in wars to protect the king. They were going to have to work so hard to build these palaces for the king to live in and pay all these taxes to maintain the king and his wife. And if the king was Solomon and he had 300 wives, and all those wives, each one needed to have their palace, and then the 700 concubines with all their privileges, where was all that money coming from to take care of all of them? It was coming from the people, the taxes that they had to pay. That is why they could no longer let the land rest, because they had to keep working and working, and the land was driven for 490 years without resting. That's why they were taken into captivity for 70 years to make up for those years that the land did not rest, because they are working to maintain the king, maintain the army, protect the boundaries. Isn't it now they've rejected God as their king? So they have to use the same methodology that the world is using to protect their territory. Otherwise, Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and overpower them. And anyway, in the end, that's what Nebuchadnezzar did. When they were weakened and they could no longer protect themselves, Nebuchadnezzar came and carried them away into captivity. And so these kingdoms have been established for the purpose of warring against God and God's people. But the assurance is that God's people are going to be given the dominion. But for you and I to be part of that group of people that will be given this dominion, we cannot use the same methodology. We cannot use the same methodology. And that's why at the end of the world, God has opened up the message of equality in an equal, in an equality context. You can't be talking about dominion, can't be talking about oppression. Wherever there is oppression of people, either because of their gender or because of their nationality or because of their race, this is the mindset of Nimrod, who has risen himself in opposition to God. He's setting himself up as the alternative to God. Because people no longer have confidence and trust in God, they need somebody that can be in the image of God to rule them, to protect them from the next tyrant. So Nimrod is the one that represents this mindset. So God is calling us to do away with the mindset of superiority, the mindset of I'm better than the next person because of my race, because of my tribe, because of my gender, because of my skin color. I'm better than the other person. Therefore, I have the right to dominate them because I'm better, right? We have to uproot this mindset from our hearts in order for us to qualify to be part of this kingdom that is going to, the kingdom of the saints that will be given the dominion. Are there any questions or comments? Because otherwise, you can see the message of equality really interwoven in all these prophetic narratives, which is really just serving to establish us that we are on the right track.
No?
Yes, Milton.
Yeah, it's just interesting that after the whole period Daniel have lived through, Daniel chapter 1, 2, 4 to 4. In chapter 7, it's like a repeat and a summary of a history that had already passed, some parts of it, and is given details with more information of the behavior and the nature of these kingdoms. And it's the second time with different symbols. It's given old and new information. And if you look at Daniel chapter 2, when Daniel also becomes part of the captives, and when you look at how he got troubled when these visions are repeated in 7, you can actually see that him seeing the coming down of Babylon, God's people being restored, he might have had a bit of comfort, but when more information is given and there's more future persecutions, I think even for Daniel, it was really a heavy message to bear, and to know that there is gonna be more periods of, you can say, pain and suffering, because it was predicting a period of which it's gonna be an escalation of the same thing: control, power, and ambition to take all the freedoms away. Yeah, it's you can actually see with the correct methodology and understanding the context now that it's more than just fighting one battle of either forcing worship on people, but it has to do a lot with even the freedom of people to choose how they want to live their lives.
Thank you. Any other questions? Are we done with chapter 7? Are we good? We are happy. There is no aspect that is confusing. Because this is really basic Adventist understanding, what we've covered here. So hopefully we've really engaged on the symbology that is being used here of wild animals representing politics and the mindset that is behind, that underlies this mindset. And because in the next chapter, we'll be looking at the kingdoms represented by a different kind of animals, and that there is meaning in that. So yeah, for next Sabbath, let's all read chapter 8 and prepare to share. Thanks everyone for those who have contributed and for attending. And we can close in prayer. Dear Lord, we want to thank you for leading us again. Thank you for the assurance that these worldly kingdoms that have oppressed your people in ages after age, that your kingdom is going to come and it is going to be given to the saints. The saints will have dominion, but the saints must understand the message of equality and internalize it so that when this kingdom is established, it will never be one that will crush and oppress people. It's a kingdom where, regardless of what a person is or looks like, they can have the opportunity to thrive and be happy and enjoy their existence. May you grant a blessing upon everyone here. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Over to the host.
Thank you, Elder Team, for the lovely lesson. And thanks a lot to those who joined and those who shared as well. So, yeah, let's meet again next week. Can people who are available for presenting next week, if you like to present, can you please forward your name either to me or to Milton or to Twin? Because we need people who are going to present. So may please people avail themselves. Thank you. Blessed Sabbath to all. Take care.